Hello, everybody. This is Dave Wood. I haven't gone live in I think a month. You know, I've not really been hanging out so much on Facebook. I've been a little bit of an update on myself. I've been working on some projects behind the scene. I've been doing a lot of reading. I decided, I don't know, it was probably 2.5 months ago that I was going to go on a reading kick for at least a year. And so I decided that I do this all the time where I'll do something for, I'll pick up a habit and I'll do it for like a year, right? So, give you an example. I started doing in about an hour a day of meditation. It was probably about 3 years ago, and I've just kept it up. So, for the last 3 years, I've done at least 1 hour per day of meditation most of the time. And then there has been a couple of times, actually, just even lately, where I've missed a couple of days per week or something like that, and I varied that meditation up. So, I stared at a candle for an hour a day for about a year, just forcing myself to develop powers of concentration. Hold on, just 1 second. I have to adjust this video. And then, I started doing different kinds of meditation. Then I was doing memory training, and then I was doing, and then I did, image streaming meditation. And just recently, I decided that I was going to, really go on a reading storm here like I've never done before. And I'll talk about why here in just a second. I have to adjust this video. Man, this is sometimes these things are so difficult to deal with. Not really; they're not really actually that difficult to deal with. But you can't broadcast from StreamYard and just have it go public immediately. You have to go manually change it. But the problem is that sometimes I click on the link and it actually doesn't work, uh, and so it keeps redirecting the video back to a different page where I can't actually put the video. I can't put the video public, which is what I'm trying to do. Give me a second here. Oh, here we go. It's not letting now. It's not letting me click on it. Here we go. I got to put that public. All right. Not that it really matters because this is not typically. This is not going to be probably the most interesting live that I've ever done because I'm going to be talking about just reading material that I went through. So, anyways, I decided about 2 months ago, while I'm working on my business projects that I'm working on right now, that I'm going to read for a minimum of 6 hours a day on most days and see how many books I could do that. And I do that for a year. Right. And I've actually really been enjoying it. Surprisingly, I've been enjoying it. So I've been reading just an unbelievable amount of literature. Now, a lot of these books that I'm reading right now, they were gifts. And so I'm trying to get through them. And it's not stuff that I would normally read, but I have actually gotten a lot of value out of it. Not all the stuff I'm reading are gifts. Some of it is stuff that I've bought, but I have to admit the stuff that I've chosen and bought, I have enjoyed actually a lot more than the gift books. And so I have a local Christian pastor who's a very good friend of mine, and he gave me like 80 books, right? And so I was like, sweet, I'll take them, right? And then I was like, I'm going to read these. And so I've got 1 month left and I'm going to be done with these books. And then I'm going to be basically reading stuff that I want to read all the time, which is going to be way more fun and way more interesting to talk about than what I'm talking about right now. But some of these are actually quite good. So this is what I read this month. I read The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. You can't see the front, but this is actually the first in the series, The Fellowship of the Ring. I've seen these movies. I've never read it. It was quite a fantastic book. I read this book by Billy Graham talking about angels. This book, I did think this book was interesting. It had some very cool stories of like angels saving people that get passed around the Christian churches. How much of those stories are 100% accurate, remains to be seen. But it was quite an interesting book. This book I actually found quite interesting. It's very difficult to see the cover, but if you look at it, it's called Quiet. The reason I thought this book was interesting is because this book was something that I would be just more likely to read on my own. It was actually talking about introverts in particularly and how introverts are valuable to society. One thing I learned about this book is that I'm not really either a introvert or an extrovert. I'm what's called an ambivert. If you're going to categorize me on that scale, an ambivert is like extroverted in some areas and very introverted in other areas. So I'm like 55% introverted. So I'm neither an extrovert or in introvert. But this book actually was quite good. It was called Quiet. I'm going to talk about more what I learned from some of this stuff, as I go through what I want to go through. This one, actually, this was an interesting book. I was quite glad that I read this. It's called Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Mark Hatfield. Mark Hatfield, he was hey, what's up, James? Good to see you. What's up? Right. I promise that I'll go somewhere where we're interesting with this this live, but I got to get through like what I read. So, anyways, Mark Hatfield was a senator, and so between a rock and a hard place, he's a Christian, or at least claims to be. You know what I mean? He's a politician. You never know. But what he talked about in this book is he talked about the moral conflict that comes up, from being a politician. These over here, a moral conflict that comes up from being a politician and having to be a politician and then make decisions that are essentially they're like somewhere against his moral values, if that makes sense, right? And so it was a good book. He talks about international politics in there, which was interesting to me because I am interested in international politics. He was a fan of one world government, which of course I actually am a fan of a one world government, just probably not the one world government that the elite want to make. But international courts are better than countries going to war with each other, right? So the idea of a one world government is actually not a bad idea. It's just that how do you prevent that from turning into like some giant hyper controlling super nanny organization that wants to regulate what happens in Fairbanks, Alaska, while they're dealing with international politics? That is the question for the sages, right? This was quite good. Disciplines of a Godly Man. This is by Kent Hughes. He was a pastor. That book actually was quite good. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Forgotten God. This one was decent. I probably would never read this again, but I did enjoy reading it. This one actually, again, you never know when you're going to pick up something like this. This is not my normal reading material, right? This is called Surprised by the Voice of God. And I really actually very much enjoyed this book, right? Because this guy had like these just wild stories of these miracles that he had seen over the years. And I believe it because I've had some pretty crazy miracles happen in my life that I'm not really going to particularly talk about in this miracle video, but I have had a lot of very, 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 very supernatural miracles, happen in my life. And so this book was quite good. It's called Surprised by the Voice of God by I think Robert Deere is his name. His last name is Deere. I think his first name is Robert. But Jack, way off. Jack Deere. Very good book, right? So I read that. I read this book. I picked this one up because it was in a used bookstore, and I was at a used bookstore, and I bought like 30 books there, and I picked this up. It's called The Ten Commandments Twice Removed. There's just not a lot of books you can pick up in English here. So I read this. It was by a Seventh-day Adventist guy. I found it interesting but inconsistent. The problem with it, I might talk about that a little bit later. Now, I would highly recommend this, right? If you are a Christian person, I'd recommend this book particularly. This is called The Story, right? Now, what this is actually, this is by Zondervan, right, is the publisher of this. So Zondervan, The Story, what it is they took the Bible and then took out all of the stuff that is very difficult to pay attention to, right? And then took together like multiple books where they have accounts of the same thing that maybe are hard to follow because that already happened in a different book in a different timeline, and you're trying to piece together, when this happened and when that happened. And they took out all of the stuff that just makes the Bible impossible to pay attention to, which would include things like endless genealogies, gigantic amounts of violence, you know what I mean? Like, and they put it into like this story that read like a novel, right? But it's not, it's from the NIV, so it is the Bible, but they just removed out all the stuff that makes it very, very, very difficult to read, which includes obviously a lot of the beneficial stuff that's in there if you're a Bible student or whatever. But if a teenager asks me a question, they're like, what should I read to understand like kind of how the Bible flows? I would actually probably give them this book. It was quite good. Actually, I read that. I read this, and this is all in June, by the way. I, Robot. This is by Isaac Asimov. This was one of his short stories. It was actually, I was expecting this to be kind of like the movie, the I, Robot movie, and it wasn't. I enjoyed that. This is a book I never would have read, but it was called When Homosexuality Hits Home. So the person who gave me these books, they had a son that came out of the closet as gay. So actually this book surprised me with I did enjoy it. And the reason I enjoyed it was written by a guy who like was gay. Now he's not, you know what I mean? but he talks about it from a very, 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 very unique perspective. It's just not something that I ever would have read on my own. But the way that he set boundaries in a very, very, very nuanced way, it was quite interesting to read. Now, I enjoyed this one, right? This is about Augustine. Now, if you don't know Augustine, Augustine was one of the very early, more interesting Christian leaders that was a convert. So he has a book that, he wrote a bunch of books, but Augustine, he has a book called Confessions that's quite famous because he was quite the heathen before he converted to Christianity, right? So this book is more of a biography, right? So the author, David Bentley Taylor, took Augustine's writings and put them together in a biography. What actually interested me about Augustine was he has a very good teaching style when they're quoting from him, because they quote a lot from his direct materials and letters and speeches and things like this that he gave. But what was interesting about him was he was one of the early Catholic leaders, right? And the way that he would justify using force to convert people, it was very interesting to read, because, of course, this is one of the things that, if you know the history of which you might not if you're watching this video, but if you know the history of Christianity, there's a couple of times when Christianity just used force and violence to conquer civilizations and justified it with the Bible and things like this. Now, Augustine wasn't too particularly violent, but there was a couple of times when he used courts and the law system to shut down competing Christian factions and throw like heretics into jail and things like this. And it was interesting to watch how he justified doing that, because I had never really read about it before. So that gives me a little bit of an insight actually into how some of the things like the Crusades and stuff like that were just like, there was some very, very, very violent conflicts in Christian history. Actually, this is something that not a lot of people know who have studied Christian history and the violence and things like this. But one of the things that is commonly known is how the Roman Empire, right, persecuted early Christianity. They put a lot of early Christians to death, right? And this is talked about quite frequently by Christians. But actually, the interesting thing about violence in Christian history is that the people that put the most Christians to death in history was actually Christians. This isn't this book's, but like if you look at Christian history, right? So like the Roman Empire and like that entire time when they were beheading the early Christians and stuff, they may have put a couple thousand people to death over kind of a long period of time. But there was times when the Protestants were warring against the Catholics and like they just slaughtered each other, right? But that's a subject for another day. Anyways, so that was it. That book was it. I actually I'm going to read more about Augustine because he was actually quite fascinating. I swear after this, I got one more month getting through this book series I've got that were gifts, and then I think I am going to take a break of reading about religion for years. I'm going to go back to like business stuff. Anyway, so this was good. I mean, so this is like a Bible study, right? And this is by a guy named J.J. Packer, and he's going over a lot of stuff, and then he ends the book just talking about hell, damnation, hell, and just this is just an idea from me to you. I've got a lot of friends that they preach on their Facebook and stuff like that. This isn't actually my normal subject matter, at least not at this point in my life, talking about this, and so this is a little bit outside my specialty. But it's good getting educated on it. But like, I got this one friend on Facebook, right, and he's like, he preaches all the time, right, like all the time. I'm sure he would like love this book. Actually, this book was more balanced. But this guy would love him because every single post this guy makes, a friend of mine on Facebook, it's about hell and how everybody's going to hell who's like not a Baptist or whatever. I mean, like every post, you know what I mean? And, I've responded a couple times. I've been like, dude, do you know that like the Old Testament doesn't talk about hell at all, right? And the New Testament only talks about hell every one out of over 345 verses. Like there's like 20 verses in the entire Bible about hell. Like, maybe you could balance this out and just tone it down and mention it occasionally to the right people when it comes up in a circumstance that's appropriate. Because most people, they just like the Bible doesn't even actually talk about this very much. I've had people say things like, oh, the Bible talks about hell more than it talks about heaven and things like this. No, it doesn't. It barely talks about hell at all, right? So that's actually not true. So in any case, this is another one. Actually, no, this is interesting, right? This is about YWAM, which is like youth on a mission, or why is it YWAM? It's about some youth missionary organization, and this person, Lauren Cunningham, which is a dude named Warren, right? Talks about how that thing started and some real cool adventures they went on, and I very much actually just I would give a positive, I'd give a positive one. Now this one's a little bit different. This was called The Efficiency Trap. I would never recommend this book, but I got it depending on who actually asked, because it's talking about doing business in Central America, right? I live in Central America, so I actually got a lot of value out of this book, and I learned a lot about Central American history. And I read some horror stories about the hospital system, out in places like Ecuador, where he tells this story about how he was doing business up in Ecuador, I think it was, and his friend fell off of a motorcycle and hurt his knee, and the hospital was like, well, we're going to have to amputate. Right? And he was like, amputate? You just do a surgery and fix his knee. And they're like, well, that's going to take a few hours. Right? He was like, fix his knee. How's he going to feed his family? This guy like works walking around his thing. So anyway, this guy falls off of a motorcycle. This is actually what I remember, two very funny things from the book, and then I learned a lot about Central American history that's actually quite useful for me that I didn't know, and about how to do business in Central America. The main thing he talks about in here, though, the main point of it is that, and this is actually useful to know if you do ever do business in Central America, that you can't standardize things in the seven Central American countries in the Isthmus the same way that you can do in Mexico or the United States, because standardized marketing doesn't work, because the unique market conditions in each one of these countries is actually very significant. It's significantly different, right? So the market conditions that exist, for example, in Costa Rica it's not like Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Panama respond to the same kind of marketing. They actually don't. And part of the reason for that, I'll give you an example. This is just something that, if you ever move down here, this is useful to know. One example is, for example, Costa Rica has no military. They abolished it in I think it was 1948. They abolished the military. So there's no military in Costa Rica. Now, what they did was they abolished the military, and then they took the money that they were spending on the military and they invested it into the education system, right? So the education system in Costa Rica versus Nicaragua, for a second, it's like night and day. So if you actually look at, for example, the average intelligence in different countries, you can pull this up because there's a whole bunch of psychological studies. For example, the average IQ in the United States of America is actually not 100. The average IQ in the United States of America is 97. The highest IQ per person on average in the world is Japan. Actually, Japan has a much higher IQ on average, and so does China. They're more intelligent than America. America is not the smartest country in the world by a long shot. They're not, right? And so, but if you look at for example, Costa Rica and Nicaragua, I mean, Costa Rica is way more intelligent, for example, than Nicaragua, because Nicaragua takes their money and they got a dictator up there. They spend the money on the military to reinforce the dictatorship, and so the literacy rate between different countries in Central America, it's massive, right? So in Costa Rica, for example, almost everyone can read, right? In Nicaragua, it's not the case. They might have 30% of the population, and this is on the border, right? So right on the northern border of Costa Rica, you have Nicaragua. So it's not like there's a big distance, but you have for example, Costa Rica, everyone can read, and then in Nicaragua, it's 30, 40% of the population, they can't even read, right? So there's actually a massive difference. So he talks about this, the efficiency trap. Would I recommend this? No, not unless, but if you're going to open business in Central America and actually do a lot of business, and then you come into these countries and you standardize your marketing in the Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and you try to make it all the same marketing they don't respond the same, so it's not going to work, right? So this is more interesting to me, actually, most of the stuff I read. This one, I'm not going to bother to talk about it, but it was good. But would I read it again? No, I would never read it again. But it was good, and they have a lot of good points. I probably know more about born-again Christianity than anybody I know but the pastor of the church I go to. Okay, so then you have the Making of a Missionary. I would never read this book, but I did. I would I learned some useful things for this that are useful for that I could transplant into building other kinds of organizations. About how to hire people and screen through people to make sure that you're bringing in people, the right kinds of people for the job that are actually going to get it done and not end up wasting your organization's money. But I would never read this book ever in my life ever again. But I did learn some useful things from it. Now, this book, I bought this. This I would recommend. Very, 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 very interesting book by Yuval Noah Harari on history. Now, the thing that I liked in particular about this is, this is a totally different perspective than these other books. I had to balance it out. You know what I mean? Like right now, I just finished reading Think and Grow Rich. So I got like one more month of reading through these, they're really religious books. I mean, it's books on born-again Christianity, which if I'm going to read something like that from now on, I'll probably end up reading things like Joel Osteen, who I like, who's very positive energy all the time, but I have gotten a lot of value actually of going through all of these things. And now I really understand probably in a much more deep way the problems that people experience in churches, for example. I really understand them in a way that I didn't understand before. Now, this one is coming from a totally different perspective because, this person is a humanist and he's a really good historian. And he had some very, 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 very unique insights in history. Actually, he talked quite a lot about religion and the fact like religion is, helped organize civilization. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, this guy's atheist, right? So he's like atheist. He didn't really say I'm atheist in the book, but you just tell he's like an atheist scientist person, but a very good book. But he basically says that the reason why human beings can cooperate in larger groups than about 150 people is because we're so good at making things up that cause mass scale cooperation. So he basically sees religion, he sees spiritual systems, he sees corporations, governments as essentially just made up systems that human beings make up in order to maintain civilization and cause us to be able to work together on a big scale. For example, all the laws of economics that we come up with as human beings, these are actually not, laws of the universe, right? These are things that we just make up because without human beings, there's no economics, right? At least on the earth, right? If we weren't having the need to be able to work together, there's no reason to have a money system. Right? If we were just animals don't have money. If they want to kill something, they pick up, a monkey will pick up a rock and throw the rock at the thing they're trying to kill, right? Or they'll grab fruit, out of a tree, right? The reason why money exists is not because money is a thing that independently exists in a real way outside humanity. The reason why money exists is because we require a way to work together on a massive scale, right? So he actually sees religions as like that. He sees corporations as like that. For example, a corporation this is an example of kind of his main kind of message of the book, right? This is the main message of the book. There's other things in the book that he talks about, but this is kind of his main message, is that we're really good at making things up. And we make up things, mythologies, religions, corporation systems, right? I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this. I'm just conveying the message in order that we can cooperate on a massive scale. And like right now, for example, one of the things that is a hindrance in some kind of a way to being able to speed up the direction of humanity is the fact that we're really good at cooperating in some areas. And then in larger areas, we're not good at cooperating. For example, there hasn't been a mythology story system created that people believe in that can create massive world scale cooperation on a government level. But we do it with money, right? So we made up money systems in order to be able to trade things more quickly because it's highly inefficient to be able to trade if you don't have some sort of universal mechanism of trade. So we created from zero, from nothing that's actually fundamentally worth nothing if there's no trust removed, economic system from thin air in order to manage the world, right? So actually, this book, he had such unique interesting perspectives in it that I would actually highly recommend it. I mean, this is recommended by a bunch of billionaires, obviously, Bill Gates and the whole, Enslave the World team or whatever, right? So I'd recommend this. And this is actually a book that surprised me with how good it was. I was dreading reading this book, I'll be honest, because it was like 800 pages. And this is by William Bennett. He was like one of the Secretary of State. Actually, I didn't know that when I started reading the book. So this was, it surprised me. I'm telling you, this surprised me. right? But I picked it up. I was like, oh man, I got to get through this. It's like 800 pages. But this just had some like real gems in it. So what this is, it's a compilation of stories that are designed to convey morals. And he prefaces it by saying like this is designed to like convey like more morality to young people. So I was expecting like a bunch of kids stories for like 5-year-olds or something like this, right? When I picked it up. But there was just so much good history in it, that he had, for example, Martin Luther King's, I Have a Dream speech in here, speeches from Abraham Lincoln, speeches from, like all sorts of people, that risked their lives and died for various causes around the world. He had history related to the formation of the Constitution in here. All sorts of neat little stories about people doing really inspiring, courageous things that kind of like when you read it, they touch your heart. For example, there's a story in here of this guy, and I can't remember the guy's name, but I could probably look it up in the book. But anyway, there was like a dam that broke, and there's like this wall of water coming down, and this dude like rode his he rode his horse through the towns nearby, warning everybody at the top of his lungs, allowing about 200 people to escape into the mountains away from the flood because the dam broke, and ended up dying himself in the wall of water that eventually overtook him, and he drowned. But he spent like the last few minutes of his life like I wish I remembered his name. You know what I mean? I could find it because it was such a touching story. There was a bunch of really touching, really powerful stories in this, and that were quite touching. And then I read this book. This is like a poem, like an epic poem. The singer, this took like 30 minutes to read. So like if you ever find it and you see it and you pick it up, it kind of was inspiring, but I don't really feel like talking about it. And then I read this. This is something I had laying around. This was like the manual for Narcotics Anonymous, which there was some useful stuff. And I enjoyed some of the stories in this as well. So that was my reading for this month that I actually finished. Overall, there was out of this, the only books I'd really recommend in this that I thought were good enough to read, obviously The Lord of the Rings, because everybody likes The Lord of the Rings. And then that I would really recommend that I thought were really good. The Sapiens book was really good. The Augustine Wayward Genius book was quite good. The story was quite good. Surprised by the Voice of God was quite good. Doctrines of a Godly Man was actually quite good because it was talking about building like godly habits. Actually, it was quite a good book. There's just basic stuff he talks in there. He's just talking about the formation of habits and how simple daily habits that you do every single day can change your life dramatically over this period of time. Like one of the things he talks about, there's a lot of people that watch this, for example, that are in different, your religions, whether it's Christianity or you're in Buddhism or you're in whatever, right? And a lot of you are in none of this stuff, but I think the vast majority of actually people that I know, they're Christians, right? Of one type or another. This is the majority of the people I know are, and so one of the things that is really common, I'll give you an example. I'll talk about some stuff that just popped in my head that, when I read this stuff, is that people always say things like, people ask for prayers. And then there's like a million people that say, like, I pray for you, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for you. But the reality is that when somebody says that, the vast, vast majority of people who say, oh yeah, I'll pray for you, right? They never do, right? They say that, they intend to do it, and then they never actually end up doing it, right? And so he talks about things like, for example, the importance of like, when somebody says something like that to you, have a prayer list and actually put people on your prayer list. And then it's the only honest way to answer that question, because if somebody says, will you pray for me? And you say yes, and then you don't, you just lied to them, So, I read that and I was like, I need to write a prayer list. So I started writing everybody down on my list who I thought about, who I've actually like said, oh yeah, I'll pray for you, man, And so, that was actually quite a useful exercise from that. And then he talks about things like, for example, people are always, like, I'm going to read the Bible one day, and they never do, right? When actually it's quite easy to read the Bible, right? If you read the Bible, for example, 30 minutes a day, you'll finish it every 90 days, right? It doesn't take a long time to read the Bible. It actually doesn't take a long time to read a book, right? So little things like this and having habits, if you're going to have some sort of a spiritual practice, to build it into some sort of a consistent habit that you're doing on a regular basis, it makes a massive difference over your life over a long period of time, right? And there's a couple things that I think that are important that I notice again and again and again. This is just from this, like, this is just from, you know, well, no, I want to change the subject now. Okay, so that was my reading for the month. I want to talk about things that are useful, right? So I've been really tremendously actually enjoying the reading. So I'm going to do, I have one more month of getting through these books that they were gifts, and somebody wanted to read them, and so they gave them to me. So, and I told them I'd read them. So it's going to take me one more month to finish through these books, right? So, if somebody's going to give me a gift of free knowledge, if it's somewhat related, something that I can actually use or that I think that I can get value from, I'd take them up on it, because obviously, that's a lot of knowledge that I have in an area. I'm not even talking really so deep about the things that I've learned, but you wouldn't even believe about, some of the stuff that is very unique knowledge that I have from these if you asked about it, right? But I just want to talk about learning in general, right? And just this is what I think is really important, that I think that we do, particularly in this day and age, is we live in a world, we live in a society that is overrun by people with opinions, right, about lots of stuff. We got everybody on Facebook is giving opinions, for example, about health. Like, you can't go on Facebook without somebody giving you like the secret to true health. I saw a post the other day. By the way, this is just no offense to anybody if you're making posts like this. This isn't calling out anybody. I'm just talking about stuff that I notice. And this guy was like, a true man eats meat every meal. Don't listen to the radical left that's telling you to go vegetarian and lose your manhood and you lose your testicles and your balls by eating vegetables, and things like this. But people will, it's funny, you know what I mean? But like, people post stuff like what they're talking about is actually the way that it is, right? And the vast majority of the people of the opinions that we're reading, they don't know anything at all about what they're talking about beyond some sort of very superficial, very rapid conclusion that they came to from looking at 3 headlines, because nobody reads anymore, right? So, the vast majority of people, they're functionally illiterate, right? There was a U.S. general that talked about this. How if you have not read at least a couple hundred books in your area of specialty, you're functionally illiterate. Because somebody who can read and doesn't is not any better off than somebody that can't even read, right? And so this is what I want you to think about: is what are you actually doing in your life that you're doing to make money, that is your major definite purpose in your life? Like, do you have I might talk about that a little bit. How can I make 10,000 a month, or at least 5,000 a month? I might transition into that, right? Right now I'm talking about reading, though, and I'm talking about general learning and education, right? I'll tell you, like, so how can you make 10,000 a month, or at least 5,000 a month, right? I'll tell you, like, just a very, very simple thing that you could do, that you could radically improve your ability to make money over the next, like, 3 years. Most people, about 60% of the population, particularly in the United States, it's like 80-90% of the population only speaks one language, right? The average income that people make when they speak more than one language is dramatically higher the higher you go up. For example, the average income in North America is about $31,000 a year. The average income of a polyglot in North America is $130,000 a year, right? I actually read a couple of different things. One of them said 130,000, and one of them said 160,000, right? There's a big difference in averages between $30,000 a year and $150,000 a year. Do you know how easy it is to learn languages now, right? One thing that you could do to increase the ability that you have to earn money from larger groups of people is to go pick up 5 languages, right? Which you could do if you picked up 1 language per year, which would only take you an hour a day anyways, right? I only speak right now. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite with this, not really, because I just started doing it, but I speak English and Spanish right now. that's it, right? But I'm going to learn. I already decided I'm going to learn Hebrew and Arabic, and then I'm probably going to learn Hindi. So probably the next three languages I'm going to learn are going to be Hebrew, Arabic, and Hindi, which I'm going to do because I want to speak at least 5 languages, right? It's something I decided a while ago, but really like a few months ago, I was like, no, I'm going to do that right now, right? I might as well. It's not that hard to learn languages. All you have to do to learn language is pick up an app like Duolingo and pick a course and go through it, an hour a day or 30 minutes a day at least, right? Or something like that. But let's say you wanted to make more money, right? Which right now I said, this is a bunch of books that I've read, and not 100% of this is related directly to making money, although on the fronts of growing, managing organizations and speaking in vision to people and things like this, it's actually incredibly useful material, right? It's just, I'm not talking about the structure of all the material that I went through because some of it doesn't really relate specifically to my target market. I have to go chunk up to principle, then chunk back down to strategy in order to make it relatable. Because it's not stuff that I would even recommend necessarily to this market because it's not directly related about what you do, right? But how could you make 10,000 a month or at least 5,000 a month? There's a million ways you could do it. You could start a blog. You could join a network marketing company. You could do affiliate marketing, right? But if you're going to take the things that I just talked about, if you go into a field, you should master it, right? Like read everything that there is in that field. In that area of expertise until you know more about that than everybody else around, and you can execute on that information, right? Better than anybody else that you know. For example, if you're going to run a business, right? Go look at that kind of a business that you're going to run. Like, let's say you're selling stuff, right? A lot of people struggle with stuff like, how do I sell more? How do I close more? How do I get better prospects? How do I get better leads, right? I'm telling you, all of the best material that there is, 100% of it, right? I'm talking about the cream de la creme, right? The very best material that there is in every field is in books, right? It's in books. It's not in expensive stuff, right? Expensive stuff has very good material too, right? If you go look at the top experts in marketing, for example, and you go and you pay a high ticket and you go to like these expensive seminars, right? Obviously, they have information that they've paid for that people are willing to pay top dollar for a lot of the time, right? But I'll give you a good example with like Russell Brunson, right? Because Russell Brunson, I've known for quite a long time, and he's the founder of ClickFunnels, and he's done a lot of very high ticket, very expensive seminars, right? All of the best stuff that he has taught at those very expensive seminars on marketing is in .com secrets, right? So if you're marketing, for example, and you haven't read .com secrets, right? That's like all of the best high ticket stuff that he's taught on that people have paid $10,000 and $50,000 for, right? Is in that book, like all of it, right? All of Tony Robbins' best stuff, it is in his books already, right? His best stuff is actually in his books, right? And I was just, I picked up a book the other day by a guy named Ryan Holiday. I'll give you an example. Who's best-selling author. He's he has a thing called the Daily Stoic, right? And he's another reader, so that's why I picked up his book because every time you pick up some sort of a book, you're picking up compressed knowledge. Because I'll give you an example, right? So this is Think and Grow Rich, right? So this is I didn't finish this last month, but I just read this again. I read this years ago, right? But actually, the interesting thing when I picked up this up again. I'm reading this from a totally different perspective because the last time I read Think and Grow Rich, I had never made money before, right? Money was like a cosmic mystery to me, right? Really, I was like, Think and Grow Rich, like how can you get rich, right? Like it was this like how to get rich was like this cosmic mystery. So right now I'm reading this from a different perspective because I built a company that we did $200 million in sales, and I put on my own events and had my own employees and everything like this. I built up this giant thing. It fell apart, and then I've made money from other things since then and things like this, right? So now I'm reading this from a totally different, but actually just finished this earlier today, and I'm on the second book. So this is like Think and Grow Rich, Master Key to Riches, and a Magic Ladder to Success. He has a lot of writing material, right? I'll give you an example with this though, right? First of all, what he says is 100% true, right? Now, some of the stuff he talks about here is a little bit weird, but even the weird stuff in some manner is true, regardless of the way he explains or not, right? In some manner, the weird stuff that he talks about is true, right? But the funny thing is that, all right, so I'll give you an example. There's this misconception. Let's say you want to make a lot of money, right? There is a very common misconception that making a lot of money takes very hard work, right? Which might be true. Heck, this might be true, right? But actually, the fundamental idea behind it is flawed. It's actually not true, right? And you say, what are you talking about? Actually, when money comes, it comes to you independent of hard work, right? It has very little to do with hard work. Because making money, a lot of money in particular, if you're trying to make more money than you would at a job, right? Like, okay, if hard work made you get rich, right? And that was the key. The secret to getting rich is a lot of hard work, right? Wouldn't like the postman be rich, or the person that like mows your lawn be rich, or wouldn't like the maids be rich? If hard work was the key to making a lot of money, like, wouldn't people be rich that like are in the the working class in India who work 12 hours a day, like playing music all day? Wouldn't those people be rich? I mean, wouldn't they be the richest people in the world? Because they certainly work harder than a lot of Americans work. We only work like 8 hours a day, right? And if you go out to the caste system, and the people lower caste, right, that are in the working class case over in India, for example, they, a musician will play music 12 hours per day in a restaurant all day. They play, right, like 12 hours, not these little 8-hour work schedules. So like if working hard was the key to being rich, well, wouldn't they be rich? So if the key to being rich is not working hard, then what is it? Well, this guy spent 25 years compiling this information, and you could read it in 8 hours, right? So that's the advantage of reading, right? So any time that you read, like, even if it's a subject that like I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because it's not particularly going to be related exactly to you, but I might use that information when I'm doing stuff later, right? So it actually was useful to me. I'm not saying it wasn't useful to me. It's just that not stuff maybe I'd recommend to you, right? I will use a lot of this information in various things that I do, and if I work with you in the future on something, I might even use some of this information together as we're building a project or whatever, right? So it's not like I won't use the information. It's just that if I just read it to you directly, it's talking about stuff that's non-related to you. I have to like translate it almost, right? So, but this particularly is really useful. So this is a good example of what I'm talking about, right? It takes him 25 years to learn this information, and it takes you 8 hours to read it, right? That's the advantage of reading. It's compressed knowledge, right? So Ryan Holiday, I was watching him talk about this, and he's read about 100 to 250 books a year for the last maybe 10 years or something like this. But he's like a little Stoic series, right? So I picked up a book called The Obstacle is the Way, right? That he picked up because I wanted to read something that he wrote, because I see his books everywhere. So I picked it up. I haven't read it yet, right? But if he reads 250 books to compile a 100-page book, and then I could go pick up a 100-page book, and I have the advantage, for example, of thousands of hours of reading and thinking that he took to compile that, and then I'm getting like the best nuggets that he has in 100 pages, right? That's why reading itself is a lot more valuable than just scrolling through your Facebook feed, right? We spend all of our time that we could be using to better ourselves doing stuff that doesn't matter today. I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about general in society, right? So I'll give you an example, right? How much do people watch TV, right? Do you have any idea? You just look it up if you're confused on it all, right? They watch TV 4 hours a day, right? Now this is on average, right? This is the average person in North America still, with the internet, watches television 4 hours a day, right? 4 hours. And then they're saying, I don't have time to join network marketing. I don't have time to do affiliate marketing. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to do this and that, right? I'll give you an idea. Let's say right now you spoke one language, right? And you're making $30,000 a year. And I just showed you the average income in North America of a polyglot that's 5 languages or more is $130,000 a year, right? How long would it take you to go from speaking one language to speaking 5 if you just transferred your television time to language study? Right? You're like, well, then I can't watch The Simpsons. Well, this is why people are in mental and spiritual poverty today is because they're like this, right? How long would it take? Well, probably about 2 years, right? Of 1 hour a day, and you'd speak 5 languages, right? It doesn't take you any longer than a couple of years doing an hour a day to learn a language to where you can speak it at least at a B2 level, which is, the people that you're talking to in that language don't get irritated by, it's not difficult for them to understand you, and it's not difficult for you to understand them, right? That takes you, something like 500, 700 hours, right? 38 hours, I think, on Duolingo is the equivalent of I think two semesters of university, right? So a full year of university in a language, right? And so you're talking about, like, you could pick up 4 languages at the same time with the amount that most people watch TV. So anytime somebody says that, like, at the same time you could learn 4 languages, and you say, well, I'm not a language learner, and nobody learns languages really better than other people. Right. And now, after you maybe have learned 4 or 5, this might change because you kind of start to develop this adeptness with picking up vocabulary and stuff like this because you've done it so much. But really, with something like language learning, it's just discipline. It has nothing to do whatsoever with how talented you are. Everybody can do that, right? Average IQ can do that. If your IQ is above 80, you could learn languages just like anybody else, right? If you can read and you can write and you could understand what I'm saying right now, you can learn language as good as anybody else, right? So a lot of the stuff that people make excuses about, right? They do have time to do it, and they do have the money to do it, and they do have the resources to figure it out. They do have the social spheres to figure it out. They're just not focused on doing it, right? So I'll give you an example. A lot of people, right? I used to train specifically, right? I was specialist in training network marketers how to solve their problems, right? So I made a lot of money from this. I was making, I got up to where before I had any of my own courses or anything like this, I was making like 40 grand a month, then 50, then I got up to making 100 grand a month. And then I started my own company that was, it was an opportunity, right? And that was Empower Network. And then we did about $200 million in sales in Empower Network. And, the vast majority of the stuff that I taught, a lot of it was packaged in a unique way. It came from books, right? And seminars that I had been to. But I'm telling you, 100% of everything that you have ever needed to know on how to build big groups of people, right, is in those network marketing books that you can get on Amazon for like $10 and $20. You have to have the discipline to sit there and actually read the books all the way through from cover to cover, and not skip around and try to just go look for the nugget or whatever, because a lot of times you'll do that and then you miss the best thing in there because you're skipping all over the place. But for example, Eric Worre has written books, right? Big Al Schrader, he's written books. Ray Higdon has written books, right? All his best stuff is in those books, right? There's a million social media whizzes that have written about how they've produced million+ people followings and things like this, right? Every single thing that you could imagine learning about is just discipline away. Right, that's all it is. I'll give you an example. I haven't read this one, right? So this is more of the stuff that I pick up that I'm going to be focused on after this month, because I got 1 month more. Because I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to get through the material because it was a gift. Number two, I want to go back to my friend and say, hey, thank you for the books. I read them all the way through, right? Which I promise he's never given 80 books to anybody and had them read them cover to cover before, right? So if somebody gives me knowledge, something like that, that's a gift, right? I'm the one that 100% of the time, I'm going to be like, yeah, I want the knowledge, right? If somebody comes up to me and they're like, hey, David, do you want to take a look at an opportunity? You know what I say all the time? Well, it depends on if I know them or not, right? Because I don't have time to just look at like every opportunity under the sun. But if I know somebody, right, and they say, hey, Dave, you want to look at an opportunity? I'm like, yeah, I want to look at it, right? Because I want to know what people are doing, right? But in any case, I'll give you an example, okay? So this is one, I haven't read this, but I'm pretty excited for it. So I'm not going to read this right now. I'm going to read this probably at the end of the month when I finish this book series. But this is Ray Dalio Principles, right? So I've just like skimmed through this, right? But this is a guy who's has made people a lot of money through investing, like a lot, right? And you just like literally, this thing is just it's organized, structured principles on how to build empires, right? Like, you go pick it up. This is like, I think this was like $50 here or something like that. I picked that up for that. But my point with this is that if you want to learn about something, right, go to the bookstore, right? And then it's all it is discipline. And if you can't afford to go to the bookstore because you're literally that broke, which there's people. First of all, I'd ask, what are you spending your money on, right? Because you're blowing your money on something if you have nothing, right? Unless you're just like, no, dude, we live on peanuts and I've got 5 kids and I only make 30 grand a year. Then I'm like, well, yeah, you're broke, right? I got it, right? But the point is that most people they're broke for a reason, or they don't have money to invest in education for a reason, or they think I'd never have time to do something like that, but they're actually wasting their time scrolling on Facebook, or they're wasting their time, which I don't actually scroll on Facebook a lot. At this point, literally, I get on Facebook like maybe once a day. I go through my feed and I turn it off, right? And this is not an insult to Facebook. I don't do it on Twitter. I don't do it on nothing because it's a bunch of useless crap. I may be honest, right? What most people post on Facebook is totally useless nonsense. And there's obviously exceptions to that. If I go on some of my good friends and I watch their lives, I get tons of value because these are people that are producing something of value. Or if I go look at, like, for example, some of my friends that are really good copywriters, which I have a bunch of really good copywriter friends. Some of my I've interviewed on my Facebook, like Aaron Rashkin, for example, and there's a bunch of others as well that I've interviewed and that I'm friends with, right? That are good. They're good at writing copy, or they're good at building businesses. And so, like Ed Ray, or and people that know how to market, right? So I go and I if I watch something, or if I'm listening to somebody like that, okay, I get a lot of value from it, right? But most of what you read on Facebook is garbage. And we waste so much time filling our mind with so much bullshit. Right? Let's just call it what it is. You're like, Dave, didn't you just read a lot of Christian books? Can't you stop saying bullshit? Well, maybe if I wanted, right? The point is with it is that we spend the time and the money on nonsense. And that's why we are not masters of what we do, right? So, like, if you did something like, for example, I'll give you an example. Right? Like, let's say you're going to say, well, I want to be like a marketer. Teach me how to market, right? You go on something like, Amazon, and just look up marketing books. Look for the 10 books that have the most positive reviews. Buy them and read them from cover to cover, from the start to the finish, all the way through. How long should that take you? Depends. If you're reading an hour a day, it would probably take you like 8 or 10 weeks, right? Now, if you want to remember what you learned, all you do when you're reading is just underline the stuff that were like big takeaways. And then once you're through a chapter, go back and read the stuff you underlined. And then once you're through the book, go back and read all the stuff you underlined in the book. And then go read all the stuff you underlined in the book again in a month, right? And you remember basically everything you learned, right? If you do that. But the point is with that is, if you did that and you just read those things like cover to cover all the way through, and as you're learning, you just apply the stuff in your business. By the time you're done, you're going to know more stuff than almost every soup can marketer that's pitching you something on Facebook, right? Soup can marketer, I mean, they learned everything they know from looking on the outside of a soup can they were eating, right, in their mom's basement when they were actually eating the soup can, right? I mean, that's basically, I know, like, for example, one of my very good friends I've known for a long time, who's actually made a lot of money. I mean, he does actually still live in his mom's basement, right? Or he lives there again, one of the two. My point is that the stuff that you, and that's no insult to him, because he'll go on and he'll build big things, but he actually does live downstairs in his mom's basement again, right? So a lot of us, we've been there. We lost stuff. We're getting stuff back, or we've got stuff back, or whatever it is. And all of the solutions to our problems, right, they're in literature, right? And I'm talking about real, well thought out solutions. I'm not talking about like some tin can solution. I'm talking about like somebody's like, well, how do I make $10,000 a month? Do you have any idea how many things you can do to make $10,000 a month? Do you have any clue how many businesses there are, right? So you're going to be a coach. Let's say you're going to offer, coaching stuff, right? For example, you want to be a coach and you want to be like a good coach, right? Let's say you actually have knowledge and you want to be a coach. There's a lot of people that want to be in coaching, mostly because they want to collect the high fees, right? Because you can charge somebody $1,000 an hour, or whatever it is, maybe $500 an hour, and then you show up for an hour and the service is delivered. Okay, let's say you want to be able to do that, right? Do you have any idea how much good content there is on how to do that effectively? I mean, you go read, pick up Sigmund Freud's stuff, you know what I mean, and read it. It's not that hard to read. I mean, it's brilliant stuff, but like go pick up the people that are good coaches that are out there and read all of their content from cover to cover, because most of that content, most of it, right, is better than stuff you run into, for example, if you're just clicking around watching YouTube videos or whatever. Anyway, that's my kick on read, because it's compressed knowledge, right? They've got compressed knowledge from other people's compressed knowledge, right? So somebody took 20 years to learn something, and then they take a whole bunch of their time to take that and to compile it into some sort of digestible chunk of information, and then you just pick that up, and then you know what they know on that subject, right? And if you just keep doing that, you're going to be a world ahead of everybody around you. And really, I want to be around people that are light years ahead of everybody else around them, right? And I'm telling you, it doesn't actually take a long time to get light years ahead of everyone around you. It doesn't. It takes a year or two. That's it. Even if you're like a newbie at something, because nobody reads anymore, nobody actually studies anymore. All their information is third hand. It's all hearsay. It's not based on research. It's not based on people that actually got results. It's hearsay, people's opinions, right? Not like there's not even like it's not even like good literature. It's not even based on anything real, right? So here, as an example, with Think and Grow Rich, like so many of you have never read this book, right? And actually, for me, again, I just reread this, actually, just finished it earlier today, and now I'm halfway through the second book as well. And as I'm reading it, I was laughing, because I'm reading this from a different perspective now, because I've done what he's talked about. I've created gigantic stuff. And the way that I created it is what he talks about in Think and Grow Rich. That's exactly the way that it works, right? What he talks about in this book is exactly the way that it works, which is when money comes, it comes all at once. It floods into your life with little or no work at all, right? And it's totally the opposite of what most people are telling you about how to get rich, which is people are telling you to get rich by working hard, by hustling and things like this. Now, all this stuff is important. We got to go through phases in our life when opportunity strikes, you do a lot of times end up working really hard. But actually, the making of the money, the getting of the rich, the getting of the wealth does not come from hard work. That is, if you think that that's where money comes from, you're wrong. That's not where it comes from, right? Obviously, again, hard work can be an important component when you're particularly in the phase of growing something. The year that I made the most money, I worked 2 hours a week, right? I didn't work all day. I worked all day for about 5 months, about a year and a half before that. Okay? I didn't work all day the year that I made the most money and had the most impact that I ever had, right? Which is tiny compared to what I'll do in the future, because in the future, I promise you, I will do way more than even 10 or 100 times what I did in the past, right? Some of it is just a matter of figuring out how. It's one of the reasons I'm reading, right? One of the reasons I'm looking for, for example, at civilization level problems and how to fix it. And I actually am picking up on a lot of this stuff through this literature I'm going through right now. It's just a little bit of a dreadful way of picking it up, because I'm looking for something that's a little bit ambiguous at the moment, right? Until I lock into it. But the reality is that exactly what he talks about in Think and Grow Rich is exactly how I made all my money, which didn't have anything to do with hard work, right? It had to do with something else entirely, and it's a secret. But in order to get the secret, you got to pick up Think and Grow Rich and read it from cover to cover and actually do what he talks about in the book, right? So there's people, I'll give you an example. There are people who have read Think and Grow Rich 20 years ago, and they never have set a major definite purpose for their life at any given period of time. Not even one time have they done it, right? You need to go back and read it again. Right. My point is that it's not just Think and Grow Rich, because Think and Grow Rich is one book. I do think it's one of the more important books in personal development, right? Because he was kind of like the godfather of the personal development movement, right? And so what happened though? Let me explain this book to you, okay? So what happened was Andrew Carnegie, right, met Napoleon Hill, and Andrew Carnegie was like one of the all-time richest person. I mean, he sold his steel company for like $400 million. This is like in the 20s or something like this, right? So this guy was alive at the time of like, Thomas Edison was still around, Andrew Carnegie, like all these people that were some of the like greats of, the greats of the 20th century and the 19th century, right? And Andrew Carnegie said, I want you to compile a secret formula on how to get rich for the average person and dedicate 25 years of your life to researching it before you put out the work. Will you do it? And without even thinking, Napoleon Hill said yes. Right? Now, here's the thing he didn't know at the time is that Andrew Carnegie was holding a timer. And if Napoleon Hill took any longer than 60 seconds to say yes to that, he would have lost the opportunity. Right? You say, why is that? Because Andrew Carnegie had learned that people that make a lot of money, they make decisions quickly and they change their minds slowly. Right? Now, isn't that the exact opposite from what everybody tells you to do? I'll tell you, the reason why most people, they lose opportunity is because when they see it, they don't say yes. Right? They lose it from twiddling their thumbs. So literally, this book wouldn't exist if Napoleon Hill had taken 61 seconds to answer that question. The book wouldn't exist. Andrew Carnegie met him and he said, I want to ask you a question. If I give you an assignment, it's going to take you 25 years of your life to research the 500 richest people in the world, right? And then to write a formula to give to everybody on how an average person can get rich. And I want you to complete that assignment. And he was looking at his watch and counting to 60. And if Napoleon Hill had taken 61 seconds to answer yes to that question, the opportunity would have been taken away. He actually said yes in 29 seconds, right? That's how long he did it. Now, here's the next thing that he told him before he went and he did the work that compiled this book, right? Is he said, now here's the kicker, right? You have to do it for free while you are holding down other work and making money in a different way. And he also had to say yes to that, right? Which he said, well, why wouldn't you be willing to pay me? And Andrew Carnegie said, because I learned a long time ago that the people that get rich are the people that are willing to go the extra mile, right? Now, just that alone is worth reading Think and Grow Rich. Now, that wasn't actually from Think and Grow Rich. Part of that I just told you was from the second book in the series, which is Master Key to Riches, right? But my point is with this, and Think and Grow Rich is actually a compressed version of The Laws of Success, which Napoleon Hill came out, which was much larger work, right? My point is with this, right, is it took him 25 years, and it takes you 8 hours to read it. What does an average person do with 8 hours? They watch 8 hours of TV. That's why they're average, right? And what goes into your head if you watch 8 hours of TV today? A very slow process of the media boiling your brain to death is what happens. To this, it's they're programming you over a long period of time to believe bullshit to control you. That's what happens if you just waste your time consuming media. And I love TV, right? But if I'm with a girl or whatever, we're watching TV, I'll watch the TV, right? For an hour or two a week is fine. But I'm not going to do it every single day, all night, right? So you ever hear I'm sure you've heard this before. What's the easiest way to kill a frog? Slowly boil it to death, right? Now, I don't like killing anything, right? But the thing is, they're cold-blooded, right? So you put a frog in cold water in a pan, and it'll just stay there. And if you slowly if you put it in hot water, it'll actually jump out, even though it'll burn itself. But if you put it in cold water, right, it won't actually notice the water getting just a little bit hotter. Just like you won't notice your brain going down the toilet watching TV 4 hours a night rather than getting rich, right? You won't even notice. Why won't you notice? You won't notice because it takes a long time, and then before you know it, you're woke and you're a dude getting a breast implant, holding a gay Pride Month flag. When 3 years ago you were Christian. I'm joking a little bit, but not really. I mean, just look at the craziness. You know what I mean? I mean, if you just turn on like Netflix now, I mean, you can't watch Netflix for like 30 minutes without some form of very slight hand social programming, right? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Daniel? I mean, it's funny, right? But this is the way it is, right? It's slow, so you don't notice it, right? And that's sometimes why people give up on their dreams, because sometimes that's what happens is the process of developing your dreams actually doesn't take a lot of time. When it happens quickly, right? That's actually what happens. When your dreams actually kind of kick in a high gear, it happens very quickly. But the process of turning yourself into that radiant person that is in alignment, that's resonating, right, with on all frequencies with what you want to create might take a long time, right? That might take a while. It's okay, but when the riches come, they don't take a while. When the riches come, they come quick. You get rich quick is actually what happens, right? Now, he talks about this in Think and Grow Rich, and I'm telling you, exactly what he talks about in this book is the exact reality of how this actually works to attract riches. So if you've not read his 25 years of wealth of knowledge from interviewing 500 of the richest people in the world, like the titans of steel and railroads, and like, why are you asking me how to make $10,000 a month if you haven't read this? You know what I mean? We're Think and Grow Rich. And follow his assignment. That's like right at the beginning of the book of like, come up with your major definite purpose and write it down and read it twice a day for minimum, and then come and ask a question, So this is the point with this. And then like, we all have an opinion about what's going on in the world, But this is where I'm at right now with things, right? Is I look at all the stuff that's going around the world, and if somebody asks me about something, if I don't really know about it, I just tell them, I'm not really educated on that. I don't really know, And then I might go get educated on it, but like, you got to understand something, that like, what you don't know, right? So what do you want to do, and then what is your purpose? And then first of all, what 100 books do you need to read to be the best? What 100 books do you need to read to be the best at what you do is my question for you. What 100 books do you need to read? Now, nobody's ever asked you that question because you probably like 100, but if you read for 1 hour a day, right? 2 hours a day, really, you'll finish about 100 books in a year, right? Okay. Maybe 80 books, right? If you read for 2 hours a day, you'd finish maybe 80 in a year, right? But what's that compared to a lifetime of poverty? My point with this is that I'm doing this, right? So I just showed you, I just went through all this stuff, right? And it's had a side effect, I'll tell you, of making my thinking just a lot more clear, right? That's been a side effect, right? My thinking has just gotten a lot more clear from the amount that I've been going through. So I highly encourage it. So again, I mean, I would very much recommend this book. It's not really a business book, but like, it had a lot of good insights in it, right? So one of the things that's like really good from this book, right, is he talks about the thing that organizes people together is stuff that we make up, okay? So stuff that we make up, something that we make up could be, for example, we needed a way for people to be able to convert their services into something that could give to other people to be able to get other services, because bartering is not, it's not something that can cause giant civilizations to work together very well. It doesn't really work, right? Particularly in today's day and age, bartering is not really a good system for this many people in the world. Because let's say, you're taking care of chickens and you need apples, and the apple guy already has chickens. You know what I mean? All of a sudden your whole system breaks down. You need to be able to like trade your chickens for money, and then the apple guy already wants money, right? So then that's why free economics works, particularly in capitalist systems with money system, right? Because we need a money system of some kind. But I want you to just keep in mind where that money system came from. Where did it came from? We made up something to cause large groups of people to work together. Actually, historically, money has worked better for getting large groups of people to work together than anything. It's worked better. It's got more people working together than religion ever had. It's gotten more people working together than, because all the religions, they're all divided at this point. You know what I mean? Christianity, there's a million factions of them. They all believe in Jesus, right? But there's like, what is it, 30,000 factions, 50,000 factions of them, right? And you have Islam, they're broken into factions, right? Israel's fairly united, but they've got their factions, right? But everybody wants money. You know what I mean? So money is actually quite a fascinating system that we have invented to get people to work together. Corporations are another system that we've invented. We treat a corporation like it's a real person. It can get sued. You can take it to court, right? There can be penalties, legal penalties on it, right? And corporations did not exist even a few hundred years ago, right? Corporations are a relatively new thing that we just made up to make money, right? So my question for you is, what could you make up to get a lot of people working together, right? I'm not talking about lying or whatever. I'm talking about what can you invent out of thin air that people can believe in, that gets a lot of people working together and a lot of people unified around a cause, for example, and a lot of people generating you money, right? That is what drives civilization, right? Is people uniting behind some kind of common cause, right? Whether that cause is based on some physical reality or not. But keep in mind, most of the things that we are united around are not based on physical realities. They're based in something that we made up, right? The Constitution of the United States of America, for example, right? We just made that up. The founding fathers just got together. They made that up, right? Like they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that people have these inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this is, of course, based on Judeo-Christian belief systems, right? But fundamentally, we are just inventing things and inventing the fact that we have rights and inventing legal systems and inventing ways of people orchestrating to work together in order to get large-scale groups of people to be able to connect together in a productive way, in order that we can create more peace, more justice, more prosperity, more money for everyone, right? Now, the world still has a lot of injustice. The world still has some war. But fundamentally, right, sometimes we complain about what's going on, right? I've done it, right? Who's gotten negative from watching the news? And it's so easy to watch the news and think we're living in a negative, horrible time. For example, in Costa Rica, where I live, this year, there's a lot more homicides than there was last year. A lot more. I think it's like 20 or 30% higher. And it's like, oh my gosh, all the Chicken Littles are running through town screaming that the sky is falling. But fundamentally, we're living in the most peaceful time in world history. You're not worried about a neighboring tribe in a cannibal part of the world coming and eating you limb from limb. And this is still going on in certain areas of the world, right? There is still, there is still cannibal tribes out there, right? That are still alive, that are still around, that still do this, and they war and they eat each other and stuff like this. You don't worry about this, right? You don't walk down the road and worry about a building blowing up. I mean, that stuff has happened, right? But people are more likely to die today of suicide than they are to die of murder and war combined, right? You're more likely to die of suicide today. That is how safe of a world we live in, is that people are more likely to die of suicide than they are of war, right? Now, that might not be the case in 30 years, but count your lucky stars. Thank God that you live in a time that is that peaceful, where you're more likely to die of suicide than you are of war. Now, I hope obviously you don't do that, because that doesn't really solve anything, right? Obviously, but that's the time. That's actually, you say that'd be a negative thing. I wish nobody did that either, right? But the reality is it's a good sign, because people have always done that, right? And there has been times when you are 30 times more likely to die of war than you are, for example, of suicide, right? We live in a peaceful time. We live in a relatively peaceful time. So what can you invent? What can you come up with? What can you envision? What purpose can you concoct? What can you create that gets people unified around the idea of working with you, right? Is a good question for you today. If you already have something where people are already working with you, what can you invent as something that people can believe in, that's a larger level archetype of a system that gets more people rallied around it? You know what I mean? What gets the whole world, I'm telling you, what drives the whole world today, in today's world, in today's society, what drives the entire world to work together is money. That is the system that we've come up with that is the most effective at getting people to work together, is money, right? Because everybody wants more money, They want more of it. They think about it. They dream about it at night, right? Because they know with the money they can get other things now. Again, that might not even be true in 10 years. Who knows what we're going to come up with artificial intelligence and everything taking over the world. But my question for you, right, is what can you invent in your life that you can create a new vision, that you can draw people to yourself, that you can get people rallied around yourself in a cause that you believe in, right? And then what do you need to learn in order to be able to do that? What is your major definite purpose is my question for you today. And then what do you actually need to learn in the process of research and the process of study? And maybe all you need to learn is some good people skills and some good marketing skills to get the other people to fit the parts, right? Because you can do a lot with that, right? You don't necessarily need to be a physicist if you can get a physicist to work on a project for you, right? You don't necessarily need to be a computer programmer if you can pull together capital and also an idea with a computer programmer, right? There's other ways of getting people to work together other than being able to do that thing yourself. So I'm not saying that you need to study books to be able to do everything yourself. One of my friends who is the most prolific readers that I know, that studies the most of anybody I know, is a leadership expert. So he basically specializes in getting people to work together, right? But he gets people to work together on a large scale, right? So ideas, you don't even necessarily need to have an idea. But you might need to know how to get people that do have ideas to work together, which they would want to do in an opportunity to make money. If they were a good idea person, they're going to need capital and they're going to need people to build their ideas, right? Because capital drives the projects, right? And to be able to pull them together, you're going to need a plan. To be able to get a plan, you're going to be able to need to coordinate. You're going to need to be able to have some sort of semblance of communication ability, which is very easy to pick up by reading about it, right? That's actually something that's quite easy to learn that not a lot of people pay attention to, is your ability to communicate a message. Actually, your ability to simply use language will dramatically improve just by reading almost anything, as long as it's good literature, right? You get the ability to communicate any idea in a superior way. But if you want to gather people around specifically, study the visionaries, right? I wish I could, I don't even know if I can find it. If this has a table of contents, I'll read this to you, because you got to read some of these people that are like, I don't think this book even has a table of contents, though. This one, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, if you read some of the revolutionaries in particular, they're such awesome they gave such awesome speeches, right? I'm trying to find something that is very specific that I posted on my Facebook the other day, but I don't think I'll be able to find it. I could find it on Facebook because I posted it. I need to take better notes on where things are at. I could look this guy up anyway. I'll look it up and I'll share it on another live. But anyway, my point was, right, if you want to know, right, how to impact people, right, go read speeches from the people that have moved really big crowds and just read them, right? Read Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, right? Why? To embed the language of that kind of stuff in your head. Right? If that's what you're doing, right? If you want to influence people and you're doing, like, for example, let's say you're doing presentations or you're doing live videos, right? And you haven't even like picked up and read the speeches of the revolutionaries, right? Like the Gettysburg Address, by Abraham Lincoln, or Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, right? The speeches of these things are moving. Just reading them. Why are they moving in such an impactful way? Why can these people convey a message in such a way as to cause you to take action that you wouldn't have normally taken if they hadn't been there and given that speech, for example? And then all of a sudden, your words begin to conform to a new kind of power that you have, with a new kind of mastery that you've gained over influencing people to do the things that you want them to do, right? Anyway, that's my message for today. My reading for the month. I got to go because I got some other stuff to do that I'm working on, but I'm thankful that you're all on. I appreciate you. Feel free to like this and share it if you got value from it, and go pick something up that is related to what you want to do. Very easy today. You just go on Amazon and look at your subject matter and look at the stuff with 5 stars. Look at the stuff that's the top selling stuff and buy that, because obviously people are buying that for a reason, right? Your competition, the people that are selling the competing products and services, they're all reading that stuff. Smart ones are, right? All right, bye-bye.